This video webinar will cover the SmartMove program Applications, Sources, and Uses document. This document will be a required component to be submitted along with the SmartMove program application. Document Overview. Let's take a look at the first tab, the Instructions tab. The Instructions tab will provide the applicant with instructions on how to complete the entirety of the Sources and Uses document. This tab will inform the applicant of appropriate CDBG caps related to CDBG share of potential acquisition costs, construction costs, and other program-specific information related to the required unit mix set-asides for LMI and/or urgent need households. This tab will utilize an example of a potential development. This development will be used during this video to better understand the intention behind the use and completion of the document. Applicants are encouraged to review this tab so that the submission will be complete and accurate. Next, let's look at the Unit Mix tab. The Unit Mix tab will be comprised of three primary sections which the applicant should use to indicate the unit mix makeup, infrastructure, and resilient infrastructure. All cells that are in white are editable. To start, the applicant should indicate the applicant name, and it should be as it appears in the SmartMove application document. For example, let's say the example city is the City of America. Next, the applicant should indicate each line as required for the development. To start, the applicant should utilize the Unit ID section, which could be an address or unit assignment and should coincide with the submitted site maps association of unit name. Next, the applicant should indicate the unit bedroom size. This cell is a drop-down option, and the applicant can indicate bedroom sizes 2 to 5 bedrooms. Next, the applicant should indicate the construction type. Again, this cell is a drop-down option. The applicant should indicate whether the unit is detached or attached. Next, the applicant should indicate the unit set-aside. The applicant should indicate whether the unit will be sold to a low to moderate household where the annual household income is at or below 80% of the area median income within the area to be served, aka LMI. Or sale to urgent need households where the annual household income is between 80% to 120% of the area median income within the area to be served, aka urgent need. Or lastly, whether the unit would be sold unrestricted to a household where there is no income qualifiers, aka market. Notice this cell is a drop-down option so that the applicant can choose either LMI, urgent need, or market. It is important to note that 70% of the program-funded units must be dedicated to LMI households, and the development must be occupied by a minimum of 51% LMI households. Next, the applicant should indicate the square footage and price per square foot for that line item unit. The construction cost cell will be self-calculated based on the entry of the square foot and cost per square foot. Next, the applicant should indicate the market price. This would be the sale price for the unit upon its completion. And lastly, the applicant should indicate and complete the resilient innovative costs and description sections to explain the cost and type of resilient and innovative designs to be included in or with the unit. We will go over more examples to better understand how to fill out this subsection of the Unit Mix tab. Next, let's take a look at the infrastructure and resilience section. If a development requires infrastructure, such as street improvements, sewer improvements, etc., the applicant should describe the work under the infrastructure section. The applicant should describe the work in its entirety and indicate the total linear feet of the proposed improvements and the proposed cost. We will also further explain activity types once the example is given. For resilient infrastructure, the applicant, if they are to create resilient infrastructure within development, should indicate such under this section. The applicant should indicate the construction method and proposed cost. Examples include rainwater detention pond, permeable pavers, geothermal. Example. Again, we will go over more specifics once the example is covered. To better understand how to fill out the remainder of the spreadsheet, let's take a look at that example. In this example, the applicant proposes to create a new street and associated curb and gutters along the street, as well as sidewalks, as you see here. A component of this infrastructure will also be any necessary streetlights and required utilities, such as gas and electric lines as appropriate. Due to the creation of the new streets, the applicant will also be required to provide first-time water service, which is indicated along the street in yellow, a water line, as well as sewer service to the development, as you see here in red, a sewer line. Next, as far as houses go, the applicant intends to create units 107A and 107B. 107A is an attached two-bedroom structure, as well as unit 107B, which is a three-bedroom attached unit. In addition, they will create units 108, which is one detached unit. This home will be constructed using a 3D printed method. Also, units 109, 110, and 111 all being one detached unit. As you can see, we also have solar panels being installed on each one of the attached and detached units. In addition, we will have generators installed. For the attached units 107A and 107B, they will have a shared generator. This is important to note while filling out the unit mix resilient innovative design description. And lastly, the applicant proposes to create a microgrid for the development and a retention pond. Let's look a little more closely how this development relates to unit costs and actual costs related to infrastructure, resilient, and construction. To better understand this, let's take a look at the example a different way. In relation to the cost types, the street, sidewalk, water, and sewer improvements will all fall under infrastructure costs. The microgrid and retention pond costs will fall under the resilient infrastructure section of the unit mix tab. The housing construction costs would fall under the unit mix information section of the unit mix tab as it relates to the overall square footage and cost per square foot per unit. And lastly, the resilient design costs will fall under the unit mix information section of the unit mix tab under resilient innovative costs as it relates to costs per unit. Let's now take a look at completing the document using this example. Continuing to fill out the unit mix tab after the applicant has already indicated the applicant name would be to complete the first section, the unit mix information. In the example, we have several units in the proposed development. We have 107A, 107B, 108, 109, 110, and 111. Each line should be created based on the actual unit being developed. Unit 107A and B, as mentioned in the example, were a 2 and 3 bedroom attached structure. The remainder of the example units were all detached. In this example, 108 is a 4 bedroom, 109 a 3 bedroom, 110 a 3 bedroom, and 111 a 4 bedroom. In this example, the applicant indicates that the sale of 107A and 107B will be to an LMI household. 107A will also be sold to an LMI household. 109, sale to an LMI household. 110 will be market, and 111 will be sold to an urgent need household. In the example, 107A is a 1,200 square foot structure. 107B, 1,450 square feet. 108, 1700, 109, 1750, 110, 1750, and 111, 2,000 square feet. The proposed price per square foot per unit is $195 for the attached structure, $250 for the 3D printed structure, $200 for 109, $200 for 110, and $205 per square foot for unit 111. As you can tell, the construction costs cells are being auto-calculated based on the square foot and price per square foot entered. The proposed market price for these units will be $315,000 for units 107A, $415,000 for 107B, $525,000 for 108, $475,000 for unit 109, $475,000 for unit 110, and $575,000 for unit 111. The proposed resilient infrastructure and innovative costs for these units, as we just saw in the examples, varied between solar panels and generators. The proposed costs for resilient innovative costs for these units will be $15,000 for units 107A and B, $20,000 for 108, $25,000 for 109, 110 unit is going to be $25,000, and unit 111, $25,000. Let's take a look at what is causing that to be that much. Units 107A and B will have a shared generator at a cost of $10,000, which is $5,000 prorated to each one of these attached units, and also solar panels at a cost of $10,000 per unit, so that each one of these attached units comprise $15,000 of resilient innovative costs. Unit 108, which will be the 3D printed home, is explained in the description, which is also considered in the higher price per square foot per unit cost. We also have solar panels being designed and attached to this unit for $20,000. For the remaining three, each will have a generator at $10,000 and solar panels at $15,000, so that each innovative resilient cost for each of these following units is $25,000. Again, this is an example. You will see within the sheet that once this information is entered, there will be a summary table. This summary table basically qualifies each cost as it relates to the size of the bedrooms and the construction type and set aside in the total number of units. In this example, we have 4 LMI units, 1 urgent need unit, and 1 unit to be sold at market, for a total of 6 units. Let's take a look at the infrastructure and resilient infrastructure sections. These sections are being comprised and explained to include any and all infrastructure costs to be developed within the development. As we saw in the example, the developer and applicant decide that they need to install and create new streets with associated curb and gutters, sidewalks, streetlights, and install necessary utilities such as gas and electric lines. We also saw in the example they're going to be installing any necessary water connections along the street to be connected to the homes, and also the water line itself under the street. They're also going to install the necessary sewer line and also the sewer connections to connect to the homes. Each one of these types fall under a certain activity, being that all aspects of the street include sidewalks, curb and gutters, street lights, and anything along the streets. It is combined under one description and indicated under activity type streets. The water connections and water line will fall under a water category, and also installing necessary sewer falls under the sewer activity. The applicant will need to indicate the total linear feet, and that is a straight line of the improvements itself. In thinking through that example, a straight line of the street was 2,500 linear feet. Again, an example. And also, particularly, perhaps there was already an existing water line or sewer that was underneath the new paved street. So perhaps in this example, the water and sewer lines to be installed were only 1,500 linear feet along the 2,500 linear foot street. The proposed costs for these infrastructure improvements are $3 million for the streets and associated appendages, also $1.2 million for the water, and lastly, $1 million to install the necessary sewer components. Let's take a look at the infrastructure. Here, the applicant wanted to create a 2-acre retention pond for the subdivision and associated appurtenances. We also had in the example that the applicant was to create a microgrid for the subdivision. The applicant should indicate the proposed costs for each. In this example, $525,000 for the retention pond and $375,000 for the microgrid. You will notice that when these items are entered, a majority of this information will self-populate under the Budget tab. For instance, the indicated infrastructure costs automatically associate under this tab, as well as infrastructure. And let's talk a little bit more about how the direct construction costs relate to this tab. Again, anything in white could be editable. Anything in gray would be something that is self-populating based on the unit mix indication. In addition to the unit mix summary table on the unit mix section, there is also 2 other sections. One is the total considered incentive offset towards construction costs, and also down payment assistance, which is calculated based on future project needs related to sales price. To better understand how these incentive offsets are constructed, you have to look at what is the total market price for LMI units and urgent need units. Here you will see that for the LMI units, there is an incentive offset of $865,000. For the urgent need units, there is an incentive offset of $189,750. This is being computed by looking at the total sales price for all LMI units. You will see that the total sales price of all LMI units equates to $1,730,000. The incentive offset is 50% of the sales value for LMI units. Therefore, you have an incentive offset of $865,000 for this category. For the urgent need units, it comprises of an offset of $189,750, which is only but 33% of the sales price of $575,000. These 2 totals will self-calculate on the Budget tab to show what is the available CDBG offset for construction related to incentive offsets. In addition, we also have the down payment assistance, which is calculated based on future needs related to sales price. These, again, are computed off of the proposed market sales price of LMI and urgent need units. You will notice that the LMI units compose of $1.73 million. For down payment assistance for future use, the applicant must be required to budget at least 20% of the LMI market price for future down payment assistance. 20% of $1.73 million is $346,000. For the urgent need down payment assistance, this is comprised of 10% of urgent need market sales price. Thus, 10% of $575,000 is $57,500. This amount has been considered under the down payment assistance section of the budget form. To recap, the applicant will be required to indicate the applicant name, complete the unit mix information by line item as required for each unit to be constructed, The unit mix summary table will self-calculate based on all information entered at the unit mix information section. The incentive offsets and down payment assistance will self-calculate again based on information entered at the unit information section. The applicant will be required to indicate all infrastructure and associated costs, resilient infrastructure and associated costs, and lastly, the section that below is for internal use only. The applicant will not be required to indicate anything at the bottom of this section. Now let's continue to finish the budget tab. Per the notice of funding availability, each project cannot exceed a total of $15 million in CDBG funding. Thus, this tab will allow the applicant to associate CDBG funding under column F so that the maximum amount of CDBG funding does not exceed $15 million. Again, several cells will self-calculate the amounts indicated in the total amount column by automatically prorating some costs to CDBG funding. The applicant can indicate other sources of funding for that line item, which will revise the CDBG funding. This tab will also include many warning signs when the overall sources per line do not equal. Let's start with the acquisition section of the budget tab. The applicant should indicate total land acquisition cost as appropriate under the total amount column. This amount will associate 50-50 between CDBG and other sources. Let's use an example. The applicant has an option to purchase land for the amount of $3 million. As you can see, by entering $3 million, this will automatically prorate this to be covered by 50% CDBG funding and 50% in other sources. Let's move down the list. In this example, the applicant also has architectural design fees of $150,000, supervisory architectural supervision fees for $250,000, engineering fees of $45,000, building permit and related costs for $6,000, survey cost of $4,000, construction insurance of $35,000, liability insurance of $20,000, for a total indirect soft construction cost of $510,000. They also have a developer fee of $750,000. Lastly, we have construction loan interest for interim construction financing of $125,000. The applicant will also be required to consider any subrecipient activity delivery costs, and this amount cannot exceed 5% of total CDBG funding. Notice that there is a flag here. Because nothing has been entered, you will see a flag. In this example, the applicant proposes that a subrecipient will need $415,000 for long-term subrecipient delivery costs. By entering this amount, it does not exceed 5%, thus the flag went away. This amount cannot exceed 5% of total CDBG funding. As we discussed, per the NOFA, any application cannot exceed $15 million in CDBG award. So let's say, for instance, the construction of infrastructure, the streets in particular, was a total of $8 million. You will notice that the budget tab has a flag that now says that the total CDBG budget exceeds a $15 million cap. The applicant has the ability to go into the other sources field to be able to right size this budget so that it does not exceed $15 million. You will notice that we are over by $958,000, $958,253. The applicant could enter that amount under the other sources column in order for it to self-calculate and reduce the CDBG share for that particular line item. That in turn right sizes the application to not exceed $15 million. Now that the applicant has filled out all required sections, you will notice that we have a total development cost of $13,480,253, of which CDBG is covering $10,958,253, and other sources will be covering $2.522 million. To complete this, the applicant should finalize the Sources and Uses tab. This tab will have the ability for the applicant to understand total other sources that are remaining to be allocated. Here you will see that the CDBG amount is self-calculated to be covered by the program. The applicant will be required to finalize this to indicate how this will be covered by other sources. So let's say, for instance, the applicant will take out a construction loan for $2.3 million with ABC Bank. The remaining $222,000 will be covered by some kind of in-kind equity. Let's say, for instance, a nonprofit assistance. You will see that once all other sources are indicated on this tab, the form will say that it no longer has any remaining to be allocated above. With this, this finishes the completion of the Sources and Uses document.